it suddenly hit me. Let's let the filthy billionaires.
Hello and welcome back to Dystopia Now. I am Kate Willett.
I'm Emil P. Torres.
And today we are so excited to be joined by a writer whose work we really admire. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Welcome, Jacob Silverman.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I'm very excited to talk to you and also scared of the information that you know, because you've been writing a book on the tech right. What has that been like for you to explore this topic so deeply over the past process of writing the book?
It's been a little strange and uncomfortable to kind of feel like you're on to something that is a real problem. I'm not saying I was early to it, but a couple years ago, really, or maybe even longer before that, when I was writing about crypto, I started to think a lot more about the political right in the tech industry, and then seeing just changes in the people I was talking to, or what you see on social media, and how these people talk, members of the VC and executive class. And then, of course, it all crested with the full-blown emergence of Musk as a fascist saluting Trump supporter. So I guess it's a strange and unsettling feeling to feel like, oh, there's something going on here, there's a problem, and then to be following and watching helplessly along with everyone else as it metastasizes and mushrooms into, one of the dominant political issues of our time.
Can you give us a brief overview of some of the central themes of your book?
Sure. So the book is basically about the last 10 plus years and the rise of the tech right, as I pretty simply term them. But, how do we get to this point where the veritable co-president, or give him whatever title you want, is Elon Musk, and that people from this traditionally utopian liberal industry, and these are kind of shibboleths or ideas that the industry operates a certain way, but we'll treat that as true for now. But people from this traditionally liberal industry have been leading these forces of reaction. And, how did we get to this point where a bunch of angry billionaires are trying to impose an austerity program on the rest of us and impose this kind of techno-fascist vision that they believe very strongly in? And what went wrong, and who are the main players? And that's really what the book is about. I think it's hopefully a guide to understanding some of these people. For anyone listening, you might know, of course, who Musk is, but Marc Andreessen or Alex Karp or Joe Lonsdale or some of these other characters might be a little more obscure. It's almost a group biography or a group portrait of who are these powerful people and what do they believe and what have they already done. Some of the stuff that they're trying to do nationally, of course, they were doing locally. Musk is doing to the federal government what he did to Twitter. Or someone like Joe Lonsdale, I write about in the book, he has actually been very important for the movement to basically outlaw public homelessness. His think tank has been very involved in legislation, legal cases around that. And that's kind of started locally in Austin, where he is, and that then spread nationally. So, these are the kinds of people and issues I'm going through.
I've been following the trajectory of some of these tech right guys on homelessness specifically for the past while. And I think I tweeted about this once, and you're like, that's what my book is about, where basically I feel like a lot of these dudes got so mad about seeing homeless people around San Francisco, people who had a place to live, honestly, in most cases before the, 2013, 2014 tech boom. And they're really pissed that, their luxury city has people in it that they don't want to see, and it has driven them to fascism. I know that's too simplistic, but from your perspective, from your perspective, how, first of all, why do they have so much animosity, fascist sentiment towards people without homes, and how has it impacted their politics in general?
Yeah, the public presence of homelessness has become intolerable to them. I mean, a lot of people don't like it. A lot of liberals, even, or supposedly people with good politics on the left, treat homeless people poorly or have the kind of the wrong attitudes or policies towards them. But of course, they see a problem and they think like, well, my money can fix this. and to them it's criminalizing it, homelessness, and moving these people out of view. And these are people who a lot of them made their money or sort of they founded their companies and made their fortunes in San Francisco and other urban centers, but they seem kind of afraid and disgusted by the grit and occasional squalor of urban life, and they blame Democrats and liberals for every social disorder or problem that they see, and they seem to approach it with very little sympathy or empathy for others or anything like humanitarian spirit. They want society to be functioning orderly so that they can get on with their business of making money and changing the world. That general attitude, that essentially elitist attitude, of course, is what then determines, or their policy preferences flow from that. So I mentioned Joe Lonsdale. He has this thing called the Cicero Institute, I believe he calls it, or foundation in Austin. It's sort of his private think tank. A lot of things he does is named after ancient Roman guys, just like everything Thiel does is Lord of the Rings related. And they wrote an amicus brief, kind of a friend of the court amicus brief for Grants Pass v. Johnson. That was that Supreme Court case that a couple of years ago. Basically, the ruling was that cities could ban public camping, I believe, on state and federal land. You have to check me on the state land part. But it widened the possibilities for local governments to outlaw camping and outlaw people being able to sleep outside, and to have laws introduced places now where people aren't even allowed to have blankets sometimes, or a piece of cardboard that functions as a blanket. Like, that's against the law in some places. And Joe Lonsdale's Cicero Institute has helped write some of these laws and helped write court briefs that push the law in this direction.
I remember Grants Pass, that ruling, and I think that London Breed's office got involved with writing an amicus brief as well as I think multiple other quote-unquote moderate organizations in San Francisco, which are really astroturfed by, a collection of tech billionaires that each kind of have their own little organization. But if I remember correctly, before this ruling, San Francisco was not allowed to, and also Grants Pass, but other West Coast cities that wanted to do these homeless sweeps, as in taking stuff away, arresting people. In order to be able to do those sweeps before Grants Pass, they had to have shelter available, or otherwise it was considered cruel and unusual punishment. So what this Trump Supreme Court ruling did, I think, is remove that requirement that there be any type of alternative shelter available before criminalizing homelessness. And to me, there's just something so viscerally disgusting about the richest people in the entire world picking on people with nothing, trying to take a blanket away from somebody who has nothing else but a blanket. It's so unimaginably cruel.
And I think bringing up the Democrats is a good point, because when I write about this in my book, I get into this a bit too. I mean, this involved the support of a lot of prominent Democrats, and in some ways my book is mostly about the tech right, but it's also about this kind of authoritarian turn that I talk about, in tech and politics. And, this expresses itself in the homelessness issue when you see Democrats don't treat homeless people like people and don't respect their property. And then you saw last year, London Breed showed up at some sweeps, though I think she refused to talk to reporters. And then you had Gavin Newsom actually personally, in one of the most vulgar, horrible, tone-deaf things I've ever seen, I feel like, Gavin Newsom personally involving himself in a sweep and moving and throwing away homeless people's stuff. It takes a real heartless authoritarian and, a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist, I think, too, who thinks that people's only value is the money they produce, to act this way. And this is one area in which kind of the tech right, and especially its very antisocial elements, have found common cause with Democrats and other politicians and people across the political spectrum. I mean, it's not just this isolated fringe group of billionaires who are enacting this. Some of these policies are sort of popular among a certain elite leadership class.
You mentioned authoritarianism and capitalism, but do you think there is a connection there between the two? And if so, what exactly is it? Another question would be that's related to this is what is the origin of this recent turn towards authoritarianism in the U.S.?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of it is just basic greed. I mean, I hear a lot of people say to me, doesn't Musk feel like he has enough? And it's a totally reasonable, sweet question to ask. One would think so, but of course, that's how these people get to where they are, is that their lives are deeply transactional and 100% devoted towards the accumulation of resources and money. And some people maybe are nurtured that way, some people are built that way, make themselves that way, but I think we have to understand that, if we're psychologizing a little bit, there is a compulsive aspect to sort of accumulation for these guys. Musk has acknowledged he wants to accumulate $1 trillion to supposedly go to Mars. I mean, you can say whether that you believe him or not, or whether this is actually possible or not, but that, that is sort of what he is saying and the direction in which he is moving and acting. And I think that's the case in one form or another for a lot of these billionaires, is that there is a sort of brazen greed and refusal and to justify it, and kind of lack of hang-ups, perhaps, a lack of, they may be neurotic, but not really about how they make their money. And that perhaps might be different than people, the ultra rich of other industries or of earlier generations. I don't want to generalize too much. I mean, like, my upcoming book is called Gilded Rage, and of course it refers back to the Gilded Age, and I make a few comparisons, but one thing was, the JP Morgans and Vanderbilts, they were robber barons with blood on their hands, but they did build institutions or things that kind of had their name on them that endured in some way, libraries and hospitals and universities, some of them. And this is not to absolve them, but I think one fundamental difference you see now with the latest generation of robber barons is that there's no really even pretense towards that. It's that their work itself and their accumulation of wealth is supposed to be considered virtuous and in the public interest. Them trying to live forever is somehow good for the rest of us. And so there's not even really talk about creating something for the public. They hate all the existing institutions. Some of them are creating counter institutions. Actually, Joe Lonsdale is one of the biggest funders of the University of Austin, Barry Weiss's school.
University always makes me, I know that's what it's called, but like university.
He's given
Come
it, 8 figures worth of money. I think at least $12 million, I believe. But
and just for listeners who might not be as online as us, the University of Austin, I think, is Barry Weiss's project originally, and it's like the anti-woke university where the classes are supposed to be like the things you can't say at a regular woke college, but it's not accredited. It's not offering degrees, or maybe it is at this point. I don't know.
And I think they do have some students now. I couldn't tell you what its degree accreditation status would be, but there are at least people being photographed listening to lectures.
I'm majoring in racism. How to? It's a trade school. Yeah.
I don't know if the racism factories are hiring now, but also the broader turn towards authoritarianism, I think, is part of this, like, this sort of antisocial tendency, this desire that they are elect, that they are elites. Some of them believe that they are genetic elites, or especially chosen by the universe. In the case of Elon Musk, I would argue that they actually think that, and that they don't exhibit much care for ordinary people. And I don't think necessarily that ultra wealthy people in other industries now necessarily, or in the past, were more virtuous, but maybe there was even a sense of self-preservation, or that, like, you have to kind of keep capitalism safe for your, or at least tamp down to some degree so that you can make your fortune, so you don't have the Bell riots or, from Star Trek or something, like, so you don't have social upheaval. And that almost implicit contract or bargain doesn't seem to matter to them or occur to them. They want it all.
I was thinking about that. I was lucky enough to visit Florence this past December, which is such a beautiful city, but it was all built by one family, the Medici family. And I mean, obviously they did horrible things. People died and were imprisoned, and I'm not trying to glorify these rulers of yore, but there did seem to be like the knowledge of like, hey, we better try to make beautiful stuff and make it seem like we're doing a good job ruling this city so that people don't come to our door with little fire sticks.
Exactly.
And it seems like the tech right, or just maybe tech billionaires in general, they now feel like they have gotten such a, I don't know if it's surveillance or, weapons, police protection, but, there's like they feel completely invincible to popular outrage, both democratic outrage, like people being able to, vote against the policies that will benefit them, but also just like Elon Musk seems like he's just not afraid of anyone in the world punching him in the face,
May I add something real fast to that?
Yeah.
Just that, as far as I can tell, in terms of these super powerful individuals with who have amassed enormous amounts of wealth, I think from their perspective, they are giving back, right? It's just that they have this sort of grander vision of humanity in the universe. And so like Musk describes trying to establish colonies on Mars as a humanitarian effort. And he's explicitly described a lot of his companies like Neuralink, SpaceX, XAI, and so on as philanthropic endeavors. So I think it's from their perspective, they are like giving back to humanity just in a way that doesn't actually benefit most people who are living today.
And I think that's a powerful motivating ideology or sort of justification that if what you do is sort of axiomatically good, you can just keep being yourself. And there's no reason for him to stop or question himself at any time. And it's almost like a form of trickle down prosperity or trickle down economics that like, yeah, we're gonna live forever, but you'll get some good medical treatments out of it later or something like that. I mean, when people even get to that stage of questioning, usually it's just spoken of in broad terms of like these sorts of things that they're pursuing, these far off achievements. And the funny thing is like if they cared at all about about making things better for the masses of people, even out of vanity or ego or self-preservation, they might fund hospitals or try to get universal health care instituted. I mean, there's still ample possibilities to profit while kind of having a less savage and brutal social system, I think. And that either just doesn't occur to them or they just don't care to enact that. And I think that creates this, besides obviously the huge gap in money, that creates this yawning separation between them and basically the rest of us, is because they don't understand, like, why don't people appreciate us? Marc Andreessen, I mean, these people are pretty soft, and Marc Andreessen gets so upset to any criticism. Musk, all these guys do, but, you can see how Andreessen blocks people or how he talks about the New York Times or the media. Like, things have gotten mildly more critical for them in the last, really since 2016, and it only makes them more resentful and angry and sort of turn inward. They're not really in that way kind of equipped for the public arena, despite the fact that they're trying to take it over. Yeah, so I think that's a sort of big difference. Like that they think like, how dare you even criticize me? Not like your criticisms are stupid or I can defeat you or you don't matter to me. It's like, you are in my way and you are saying things that are just idiotic, you little subhuman.
Marc Andreessen has me blocked on Twitter.
Me too.
And a couple of these other guys follow me. And I'm just like, bros, you're billionaires. Like, you literally do not have to worry about, like, a random comedian who's not really famous talking shit on you, Like, it's just so dumb.
Andreessen blocked me, and then, like, 6 months ago or something, he unblocked me. So
got unblocked and then blocked again.
Yeah, so I don't know what the story is there, but currently, as far as I know, I'm not blocked by Marc Andreessen.
Oh my gosh.
But he knows who I am.
I wanted to ask, because before the show, we were talking about which billionaires comprise the tech right, as you would define it. And you were talking about how a lot of these billionaires originated in the PayPal Mafia. For people who haven't heard this term before, can you explain what the PayPal Mafia is and who these guys are?
Sure. PayPal Mafia is a group of men, all men, mostly white men, who came out of PayPal 25 years ago or so. Big payment startup that has obviously become a big company that a lot of us use to buy stuff online or elsewhere. And PayPal was a fabulously successful startup that was eventually bought by eBay, but it also spawned many other companies. And because the people who found it or who were involved in it early on, like Peter Thiel, Reid Hoffman, Elon Musk, David Sachs, they went on to found other companies, a lot of them. And some of those companies are kind of political, I would say, in orientation. What Max Chafkin, who wrote a good biography of Peter Thiel called The Contrarian, says is that the PayPal Mafia started as a political network before it was a business one, or at least from the start, it was politically minded. And I think it persists in a loose, informal way, or not even that necessarily that loose. I mean, someone like Reid Hoffman, who went on to found LinkedIn and became a multi-billionaire, mostly supports liberal politicians. But a lot of these guys are conservative right-wing and kind of form the nucleus of the tech right. That I think Thiel is probably the presiding, spirit over, even though he wasn't as active this last election cycle. And you see these people popping up everywhere now. A member of the PayPal Mafia is in charge of Sequoia Capital. Ken Howery is the ambassador to Greenland. He's a PayPal Mafia guy. He was Trump's ambassador to Sweden, ambassador to Denmark, I guess. But he's being involved with the whole sort of taking over Greenland operation. So it's a political and business network, but that is very ideological at its core, and that it's right wing. It's sort of putatively libertarian, but really more just right wing kind of. We're looking to profit from the state, and disrupt it a little bit, but not necessarily utterly destroy it in the libertarian way. More like let's destroy it a little bit so we can make some money from it.
You mentioned the word tech fascism a while back. What is your definition of that term? So fascism itself, that is like a highly contested term, and there are a bunch of different definitions. There's like the listicle approach, where you just sort of list a bunch of attributes that fascist movements have had. Jason Stanley would be an advocate of that view. Mm-hmm. So tech fascism, help us to understand what you mean by that.
Sure. Yeah. Some of these terms can get a little thorny, or they're heavily disputed. Some of them are too niche, perhaps, but I don't think tech fascism necessarily is. I mean, I think the basic thing is, for me, it's fascism that emanates from the tech industry, from its leading lights, these group of billionaires whose names we know, and that it is like sort of traditional fascism. It's there's no democracy. It's a union of corporations and the state, with tech and Silicon Valley very much at the vanguard, the forefront of that union. And it also involves, I think, as we're seeing playing out right now, purging the state and replacing as much as you can with AI, software, and tools and personnel controlled by the tech fascists. And there are probably other elements, and certainly cultural currents running through that you could point to. But so those are the basic things for me, and the basic characteristics. And I think one thing that's worth emphasizing is that a lot of the people we're talking about have explicitly said that they don't believe in democracy. Peter Thiel has famously written about this, that freedom and democracy are incompatible, and he doesn't, and he prefers freedom, which he has a very specific kind of hyper-capitalist libertarian vision of. And Musk has talked about wanting a Roman emperor or something like that. Some of these guys are more intellectual than others, but it's a basic disbelief in democracy, ruled by an elite, by them. And it's kind of technocracy at the level of fascism.
To me, from somebody who is not researching it as deeply as I know you are, it seemed to me in the past that a lot of these guys used to be libertarians. They're sort of ideological North Star was like Ayn Rand, the fountainhead kind of situation, where they were just I guess just much more traditional libertarian. And then there was a shift at some point towards a type of authoritarianism. And I don't know if that's an accurate perception, but what do you think about that?
Well, it's kind of like true tech libertarianism has never been practiced, maybe. I mean, they say, a lot of them like to say it, I think, because it's sort of a almost a cool thing, or when you're in college and first learning about, there are different political ideologies, there's something called libertarianism. It appeals to them, but the fact that in practice so few of them actually seem to be libertarians just tells me that it's kind of a label that they like to take on or find appealing on a certain symbolic or representational basis, maybe. But Peter Thiel, that line about freedom and democracy being incompatible, I think, is from his essay "The Education of a Libertarian." He's very big on this, and again, he holds himself out as sort of an intellectual, or at least a thinker. But this is a guy who is a close ally of the security state, of course, and is kind of reinvented himself or made his latest fortune as a security state contractor through Palantir, and helped catalyze this whole defense tech movement and this whole industry now of defense contracting and security state contracting being seen as a good unto itself in the tech industry. And that's like, I think that people would have been in an earlier era where libertarian ideas were still actually at least a little bit flowing through like the kind of the cultural currents of the tech industry. People might have had second thoughts about that. Like, I think in the 90s, perhaps, if people at big tech companies might not, Microsoft, I'm sure, had government contracts, but they would have been a little more ill at ease in building weapons or things that felt like they were more for military use. Even 10 years ago, there were protests at Google over Project Maven and stuff like that. And we've had this big cultural shift according to the powers that be, but also according to a lot of young engineers and a lot of young male engineers who you see entering the tech industry. That kind of stuff is cool now. It's good to build weapons. They talk about how they want to, this is kind of the Andro line or the Alex Karp line, which is that, build incredibly scary weapons to intimidate our enemies into deference. And nothing about diplomacy or being sort of an adult on the world stage. It's just you build crazy weapons and scare people, and that's how you have peace through strength. And these kinds of attitudes just, I don't think are really compatible with real libertarianism. Not that I'm a great fan of that ideology, but they're not. But that's what I sort of mean is that like libertarianism never actually ends up being practiced in Silicon Valley. It's because the idea of uniting with the state is, I think, for power and money is too appealing. And they've really embraced it with defense contracting and now even with crypto. The state is getting involved with crypto. The president is a crypto entrepreneur. And these are things that...
I'm sorry, it's just so cringe.
The president is a shitcoiner, and he is passing law or doing policy in order to enrich himself in that. And things have changed dramatically. But I think that's, in the end, it obviously comes down to money and the possibilities they see there. But that's the sort of other path that they've taken, I think, and why we've ended up at this place more of fascism than kind of, libertarian breakdown of the state.
What do you see as their end goal? Is it just power? Is it mere power and more wealth and so on, driven by greed? Is there some like deeper worldview or ideology that this power, the accumulation of this power, is in service to?
I think there has to be for some of these people as a motivator, or at least you even hear it from them. Like, again, I go back to kind of these young coder bros, the guys who work at AI companies and defense tech companies. What you hear some of them talking about are well, actually, one specific concept you hear sometimes is they talk about the Kardashev scale.
Yeah.
Which, just for listeners who may not be familiar, this was a concept created by a Soviet writer, scientist, that during the Cold War, that you can measure a civilization's, it's kind of almost a science fictional kind of metric. And you can see why this would appeal to, people who like Isaac Asimov or Robert Heinlein. And it's that, there are scales of civilizational advancement and the Kardashev scale. And scale one, or step one, I believe, is to be able to capture all energy from your local star. So our sun. And then you move on to like all energy in the solar system, and then these steps until suddenly you're kind of like a galaxy bestriding colossus, and you're a level 5 or whatever it is Kardashev civilization.
Yeah.
This is actual language that I see people talking about. You see it in their Twitter profiles or their X profiles, like just trying to step up the Kardashev scale. Some people, they're being told this tale like civilizational greatness. It's like what Musk talks about, extending the light of consciousness.
Yeah. So you're mentioning the light of consciousness and this idea of like preserving it in the universe and spreading it as well. This is really, really fascinating. Basically, everyone I've spoken to who spent time in Silicon Valley, including some scholars who went there to study the people as sociologists, all say that, these are the sorts of things that people talk about.
I think that the people in tech are looking for and subscribing to these sort of grand civilizational narratives, whether it's about AGI or colonizing the solar system or any other number of things. We were talking off air about the TESCRIL acronym. Yeah. Like, they are embracing grand narratives and myths that they can be a part of. And I think, that can be powerful. And especially if perhaps your day-to-day job is, you're just improving the efficiency of some ad tech delivery system or something. Or if you're working on an AI drone program for the military. It can still, these sort of ideas that there's heroism in what they're doing every day. It seems a little ridiculous to those of us on the outside, but it's a kind of mythos that they've worked to build up for themselves.
I would say, just as someone who was in this community for a long time, I can confirm that as well. There are people. So my work specifically focused on existential risk, any catastrophe that would prevent us from realizing this vast and glorious utopian future among the literal heavens. But there absolutely was a sense within my research community that what we're doing is of extraordinary significance, not just in human history, but cosmic history. So there was this amazing sense of importance, that what you're doing is really, really special. And as I understand it, that consistent with what you're saying, that's exactly what a lot of people in the tech industry feel as well. I mean, they're developing these technologies that are the vehicles that will take us to this utopian future, that will take us up the Kardashev scale. I say Kardashev, I don't know the right way to pronounce it, but take us up to the Kardashev scale. We're not even at Kardashev level 1 right now. The ultimate goal was to get.
They're impatient with that, or upset about it, you know.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff that baffles me sometimes. Also, it's like, I understand why those ideas are appealing, but like, you know, I'm a regular guy like the rest of you. Like, I'm worried about bills and healthcare and like childcare and stuff like that, like really fundamental material stuff. And the people around me all are too. So it's just, I just have an inability to really get excited or cheer for that vision, you know, when they're homeless people down the street, or like we're worried about paying our medical bills. It just seems ridiculous, of course, that then you have people talking about colonizing the stars or life extension when most people are just worried about a simple doctor's bill. And that is also, again, speaks to that vast gulf between like the tech industry, what it thinks it's doing and how it sees itself, and perhaps how a lot of other people or its users even see it and interact with it and think of them.
So, Jacob, where can people find your book and read more about the tech right if they want to scare themselves even more?
Well, I'm sorry for the wait, but it comes out right now. It's scheduled for beginning of October. It's called Gilded Rage: Elon Musk and the Radicalization of Silicon Valley. It's available for pre-order from booksellers, Amazon, bookshop.org. If you want to be a little more virtuous, Bloomsbury's publishing it. There are also links on Bloomsbury's site. There's no book cover yet, but I will be relentlessly promoting it. And my website is jacobsilverman.com. I've written about all the things we're talking about, and you know, some of this stuff will be in the book. Some of it is, I've written versions of this before for other publications. So, you know, I hope people will check out my work, and if you enjoy it, read the book or pre-order the book. You'll forget you ordered it. It'll arrive in October. You'll remember and be excited, and then you can read it.
That's sort of an optimistic claim about our society still existing in October.
Yeah, I wish I could speed up the timeline a little bit. Like, I'm done and ready to have it out there, and it's a little bit tough to kind of write towards the future when the future is so uncertain. But what can you do? It takes a while to print the book, apparently.
It's hard to write about these topics without your articles or books or whatever becoming obsolete, right?
Yeah.
It's just, everything moves so quickly that,
yeah,
you know,
it's something I try to think about also, is like, even as I'm dealing with a lot of proper nouns or things of the news cycle of the current moment, like, how can I make this relevant in a few months or a few years, hopefully with a book, or speak to larger issues that, you know, aren't just about like the one thing Elon Musk is obsessed with that day.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited to read it.
Sure thing, and congrats on the new show.